I'm Robert Polito, Director of the New School Writing Program. It's my immense pleasure to welcome you to this reading in celebration of Joe Brainard on the occasion of the publication of the collected writings of Joe Brainard, edited by Joe's great friend Ron Padgett, just out from the Library of America. Our readers span poets, novelists, and editors, some combining all of those activities at once. Yet also it's a diverse assembly of friends and admirers of Joe Brainard as a one-of-a-kind artist and writer, and include, in the alphabetical order in which you will hear them, Paul Auster, Frank Bidart, David Lehman, Harry Matthews, Geoffrey O'Brien, Ron Padgett, and Edmund White. For those of us intent on collecting all of Joe Brainard's writing, often in elusive small press editions, as we move past the almajestic I remember into its prior constituent incarnations, I remember more, I remember more, and past his selected writings of 1971 and new work of 1973, into such books as Some Drawings of Some Notes to Myself, Bellinus Journal, The Friendly Way, or 29 mini-essays. Ron Padgett and the Library of America offer a gift of the sort that Elizabeth Bishop once styled in her poem, quote, "Life and the memory of it so compressed they've turned into each other, the little of our earthly trust about the size of our abidance." Now that we have Brainard's collected writings, it's possible, for instance, for the first time to track I remember back to a previously unpublished typescript of 1963 called A True Story, where amidst a sweet and lively listing of various likes, absences, and losses, Brainard suddenly breaks into the cadences of what 7 years later would compose his signature memory work. "And I certainly do miss New York," he says in A True Story, and then immediately goes on, "I remember green plants and white walls, my studio. All painters have white walls. They might have been dirty, I don't know, but now they are white. I remember, damn." Could fans of I Remember have lived without that sly, urgent, self-surprised and telling, damn? I don't think so. And in the Library of America collected writings of Joe Brainard, the radiant, deadpan observations and epigrams of the Bellinus Journal, among them this: "It always bothers me, this combination of sincere and wrong. It doesn't seem fair. Sincere should always be right." Or this: "It's not so bad, really, rejection." Huh? It's not so great either. Here now, those epigrammatic observations emerge as vivid, mysterious moments along a lifelong tracing and probing of memory that includes the previously unknown Diary 1969 and the never-before collected little-known facts about people and a special diary. And for those of us who knew Joe Brainard, the Library of America and editor Ron Padgett have performed a powerful act of renewal and embodiment, as every elegant page of the collected writing summons up Joe, his singular mix of wit and candor, his directness and ingenuity. Even an incidental running into Joe at a gallery opening or a reading, whether it's St. Mark's or inside this auditorium where we are tonight, was an occasion, an event. So I thought as my piece in this celebration, I'd read a very short work from 1963 with the large title, Autobiography. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1942. No, I wasn't. I was born in Salem, Arkansas in 1942. I always say I was born in Tulsa, though, because we moved there when I was only a few months old. So that's where I grew up, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A lot has happened between then and now, but somehow today, I just don't feel like writing about it. It doesn't seem all that interesting, and it's just too complicated. What's important is that I'm a painter and a writer, queer, insecure about my looks, and I need to please people too much. I work very hard. I'd give my right arm to be madly in love, well, my left. And I'm optimistic about tomorrow, optimistic about myself, not about the world. I'm crazy about people, not very intelligent, but smart. I want too much. What I want most is to open up. I keep trying. So now for Paul Auster and more Joe Brainard.
I'm going to read a very early piece. It's the book is set up with the first section is I Remember, and then there are all the other shorter prose pieces that Joe Brainard wrote. The first piece in that section is previously unpublished. Therefore, the thing that I'm reading, the second, I believe is chronologically the first thing that Joe wrote that got published. And I'm assuming, Ron, this was around 1961, perhaps 62? Yeah. So in other words, he was born in 1942. So this is the work of a 19 or 20-year-old boy. Back in Tulsa again. Unfortunately, I can't read it all. It's too long, so I'm going to read the beginning and the end. Back in Tulsa again by way of a free ride from Ron's father, Ron being a Columbia University student, also poet, and Ron's father being a John Wayne with $80 cowboy boots. I wear desert boots. Pat usually wears very basic black flats, though she looks better in high heels. They complement her legs. Very nice. Yes, Pat, too, made the big move back to Tulsa. The Three Stooges made the big move back to Tulsa. The Three Fuckadoos made the big move back to Tulsa. The big move back to Tulsa was made by Pat, Ron, and myself. The trip was as normal as possible, considering John Wayne drove in $80 cowboy boots, and we, the three Tulsans in New York, were his passengers. Yes, even Ron was a passenger, as I am now a guest in my own home. In my own home, I am a guest. We three passengers made the big move back to Tulsa. 3 people, a strange number of members for a relationship. We 3, 1 girl and 2 boys. Or should I say, women and men? Both embarrass me and seem not quite right. 3 people, a poet, a woman, and a painter. I being the painter, Pat, naturally the woman, and Ron, obviously the poet. But Ron is obviously a Columbia University student. We 3, Pat being my favorite, next to myself, made the big move back to Tulsa for lunch, a fantastically voluptuous lunch with entertainment. Lunch, Ron said again to his father with $80 cowboy boots, driving like a madman directly aiming at Tulsa with serious convictions of direction. Yes, Ron's father was anxious to get home to Tulsa, home to space and lightness, white square gas stations and shining car lots. Ron's father is obviously from Oklahoma. We, Marx brothers, -1, are obviously only flounderers. Floundering because we are neither New Yorkers nor Oklahomans. But I am a painter. Not a man without a country, but a man, or should I say a boy, with a country too big. A country too big, and with no secret hiding place or clubhouse. The dues are simply too high, too high. The sky is higher in Tulsa. The sky is higher in Tulsa than in New York. Lunch, Ron repeated again and again. Ron was obviously hungry, which made Pat and me very envious. Envious because Ron had at least momentarily found some positive and alive state of being, some identity to desire, which actually was. We were envious, enormously envious. Pat even more than I, she being a woman and all. Women are much more susceptible to such emotions, those of envy or pity or jealousy, all unconstructive emotions. Yes, Pat was envious. Ron was hungry, and I too was envious, but not too envious, for I was constipated. And then I'm jumping, cutting out 2 pages, and here we pick it up again. It was my turn to be by the window. Goody. It was open, with my arm and head stuck out, and the wind stinging my face, making it even hard to breathe. I sang louder, but no one could hear me. The wind blew the volume back down vibratingly into my throat. I sang the worst songs in the world, not knowing why I sang the worstest songs in the world, the Tennessee Waltz, Tell Me Why, Dancing Matilda, and The Thing. Others too, yes, many others, and more others, many, et ceteras. We slept, Ron's father drove, we smelled the dry grass. Bad at first, then heaven. We entered Tulsa. Ugh. Ugh, ugh, we sang. Ugh, ugh, as we entered Tulsa. Ugh. John Wade smiled, and we three sang, ugh, ugh. It's very funny. An undescribable farce began. Simply undescribable, quite simply unbelievable. A farce which could only possibly occur between a woman and two men, a girl and two boys, in a car driven by John Wayne, wearing $80 cowboy boots, driving from New York to Tulsa, Oklahoma. We sang Oklahoma. Oh, 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 Oklahoma, we began. O-K-L-A-H-O-M-A, Oklahoma, okay. We ended. We laughed. Ron giggled, and I snorted. Pat was choking on a Spanish peanut. Thus it began. Thus the farce began. The farce began as thus. Pat, by this time quite green, was still choking to death on her fifth Spanish peanut of the day. Ron and I were rolling on the, a very tight squeeze, floor of the Ford in tears from pity or excitement, we knew not which. We cared even less, for the spirit was in us, the spirit which we never doubted. Ron and I were red from laughter. Pat was green from lack of air. The Ford was light yellow. The sky was blue, a sky blue, a high sky blue, like the sky in Tulsa it was. Ron stuck out his tongue for no reason. I laughed at him for the same reason. Pat tried to laugh for the same reason, but found it difficult. She found it quite difficult to laugh while choking on a Spanish peanut, especially for the same reason. I did a flamenco dance. It was not well done, but very voluptuously stimulating and meatily exciting. That is, for me. Pat joined in, though she found it very difficult to flamenco in a yellow Ford going 95 miles an hour while choking on a Spanish peanut, and with a partner too. But Pat had the spirit. Ron had the spirit as he hurriedly undressed. I undressed. I winked at Ron and said, go. We violently attacked Pat. It worked. Pat swallowed her fifth Spanish peanut of the day. We were happy. Pat was especially happy. We celebrated in a happy way. We stopped for a Dairy Queen, a 25-cent cone. Joy, joy, joy. Happy day. The sun's a shinin', oh happy day, ah. No more trouble, no skies are gray, ah. Oh, 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 oh. Happy day. We sang violently. Yes, violently, for the Dairy Queen had stimulated us to a fantastic degree of insight. We saw clearly at that moment, that glorious moment of knowing that the world was basically violent, at least in comparison to a 25-cent Dairy Queen. Tears came to my eyes. I cried. I cried for the first time in 7 years. I cried violently into my Dairy Queen. My Dairy Queen had by now melted considerably. I had dropped it several times. It was very dirty and sticky. The tears made it very watery, and it was overflowing. I watched. I saw in it a fly in my violently overflowing Dairy Queen, diluted from tears. It was too much. I remembered the jolly pink man who had carefully handed it to me from the hinged, small, square, screened opening. He had smiled as I took possession and handed him my 25 cents, my last 25 cents. It was beautiful, so purely white and nice, in a delicately crisp cone, a curl on top, ripples of white sand. Arabia, I thought. Yes, I must go to Arabia. I'd been there so often in my dreams. I wondered if they had Dairy Queens in Arabia. It was too beautiful, and now it was dirty, 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 dirty. I wept. That is, I continued weeping. I continued weeping for the rest of my life. Thanks. Frank Bidart.
When New Work was published in the early 70s, I sent Joe Brainard a fan letter, which is not something I do. And it took me 20 years to actually meet him. And astonishingly, he was the person who he exemplified the qualities of mind and character and sensibility that one adores in the writing. I think it's easy to recognize the purity, the freshness, the distinction of Joe's writing, but it's quite hard to define it. It has a kind of radical simplicity joined with a tremendous sophistication, which Joe also had as a person. He found a way to make his writing utterly reflect his mind thinking, his person. This combination of sophistication and radical purity, simplicity, is unique in my experience, as his person was unique. What I want to do today, I'm going to read a prose passage and a poem. And the prose passage suggests that this combination, as I say, of a kind of radical directness and honesty. He was very sophisticated about understanding, in order to embody that in a work of art, this took departures from what standard practice was. And so let me begin by reading this prose passage. It's called Friday, May 9th. It's from the 1969 diary. And Joe chose it to be included in his selected writings. Friday, May 9th. Today is a rainy day, dark and cool. I feel good today. I think that I would like to do nothing today. Something I rarely do, nothing. But I'm too nervous, so I am writing. And after I finish writing, I'm going to try to finish the end papers for the Random House Anthology, an anthology of poetry Ron Padgett and David Shapiro edited. I've already finished the cover, and I like it. It is a white cover with red words and objects, floating objects. Actually, the objects do not exactly float. They're more stationary, but suspended. Suspended in space. A chair, a cherry, a modern design, and a butterfly. Somewhat by accident, I have broken every rule of good design, which pleases me. This happened, I think, because I did the cover very slowly, object by object, over a period of 5 or 6 days, with little or no finished product in mind. One object or one word told me where the next object or word would go, allowing little room for dash or inspiration. The result is clean and unprofessional in a good way, and cheerful. The end papers will also be red on white. Red objects on white paper. There is, so far, a feather, a pansy, a lipstick kiss imprint, and a boot. Each object cancels out the other objects, but not too much. Only in importance. Each object is equally important visually. Kenward and I plan to go to West Hampton this weekend. I do hope it will be sunny. I can't wait for summer. Summer and fall to me are like New Year's, and I need a new year. Well, the realization that something about his sensibility needed to embody itself in this object followed by object, and each having a kind of being in a kind of suspended relation to all the others. Well, that describes, in part, I remember, and it describes also, I think, it's connected to how the poem I'm going to read you is made. One of the glories of the New York School of Writing is the number of poems about friendship and social occasions that they were able to write. And that's quite rare. I mean, Ashbery, Frank O'Hara, Harry Matthews managed to write poems of intimacy and friendship that did not need for their occasion, did not need there to be a great event. They were able to look at social events, which often are made up of very mundane details, and somehow embody them with a kind of freshness and gravity and a sense of how they are bound up in friendship, and to make a work of art out of that. That is not at all the way, say, poems in the Renaissance that embody friendship feel. It's a radical, it's a kind of foregrounding of immediate experience and objects, and understanding their freshness, their character, their adequacy to the spirit at that moment. Let me read the poem, and I think these things will be embodied by it. It's called The Outer Banks. It's addressed to James Schuyler. The Outer Banks. Those silly seagulls up there in the sky over there remind me of a particular local postcard of many seagulls in the sky that could go on and on forever were it not for the edges. Reminds me of a particular Southampton postcard of a seagull soaring high, the only Southampton postcard simplistic enough to be commanding enough to survive the horrors of photochrome Technicolor. Reminds me of you, Jimmy, out in Southampton in the big porterhouse, in your little room of many books. It takes game strategy to relocate now as then, until recovering the wildflowers on the wallpaper peeling off the long, narrow corridor that leads up to your door. It is not closed. Upon your window of green in from the yard of the sick tree in so many paintings by Fairfield Porter. That was the summer of, not knowing how many years ago, is just how it ought to be remembered, and is. Out trekking up South Main Street, you are a pair of thick white legs sporting Bermuda shorts of a most unusual length, and plain blue sneakers, so you, they are. That was the summer of Campari and sodas, remember? Out trekking up South Main Street in the pattern of the leaves from the shade of the trees that align South Main Street, most daily is us, trekking up South Main Street on our way to the drugstore with all the sunglasses on racks that whirl so fast, where you got your newspapers from, where I got my magazines from, where we both got our seagull postcards from to send to each other, mostly, when in the future's apart. And remember the store on the corner with all those plain, the kind of plain you pay for, English sweaters of every imaginable color that surely any respectable movie star would have a whole walk-in closet full of, that we bought a few from too, or if but two. Baby blue I see for you, and raspberry sherbet for me. Easier to buy than to wear, especially when thrown over the shoulders like they did, with no socks on, in Italian loafers. If money can buy such nice ankles, where? With sunglasses up in their hair. Ah, the good old days. If gobbled then, digested now, clarified by time, romanticized by mind, for today's repast remembered. Out along these outer banks of North Carolina, for no reason whatsoever, except ocean. Thanks. David Lehman.
It's an honor to participate in this tribute to Joe Brainard. This is a great book that Ron Padgett edited and Paul Auster introduces with an essay. John Ashbery, with whom Joe Brainard collaborated on a book, once wrote, Joe Brainard's modesty is the modesty of the gods. Here's a prose poem by Joe called Sick Art. Mona Lisa's smile often causes observers to overlook the fact that she has no eyebrows. One skin specialist offered the suggestion that Leonardo da Vinci's model was suffering from a skin disease called alopecia. Alopecia is a skin disease in which one has no eyebrows. On the other hand, many women in those days shaved their eyebrows, and Leonardo da Vinci's model may have just been following the fad. There is no doubt, however, that Rodin's The Thinker has bunions on both feet. Today, with modern art, it is not so easy to spot diseases and physical disorders. Many doctors, however, have noticed the strong relationship between various skin diseases and the paintings of Jackson Pollock. Fungus infections are very common in the art of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Another prose poem that in a way is a meditation on a subject is fear, the subject being fear. A good life should be lived without fear. On the other hand, trying not to be afraid of something you are afraid of is stupid. Avoiding fear is no good. The only solution is to give in to fear and then try to overcome it. Nothing can be understood from a distance, and nothing, of course, can be understood until it is understood. Only by not being afraid of the lion, but of the fear in you that makes you afraid of the lion, can fear be overcome. In this area, I am a total flop. And the last 2 pages of I Remember, or of the last installment of I Remember, begin with, I remember Christine Keeler and the Profumo affair. I remember stories about how LBJ got off on holding private conferences while on the John. I remember the rumor that James Dean got off on bodily cigarette burns. I remember fantasies of what I would say to a certain reviewer who gave me a really mean, to say nothing of stupid, review once should we happen to meet at, say, a party or something. I remember awkward elevator moments. I remember when both arms of your theater seat have elbows on them. I remember making designs in the dark with a fast-moving lit cigarette. I remember spooky when all of a sudden someone you know very well becomes momentarily a total stranger. I remember stoned, reaching out for a joint that isn't really being passed to you yet. I remember stoned when the most profound thought in the world totally evaporates before you can find a pencil. I remember night, desperate, to say nothing of fruitless, flips through my address book. I remember how silly it all seems in the morning, again. I remember getting up at a certain hour every morning to walk down the street to pass a certain boy on his way to work. One morning I finally said hello to him, and from then on, we always said hello to each other. But that was as far as it went. I remember taking communion and how hard it was not to smile. I remember smiling at bad news. I still do sometimes. I can't help it. It just comes. I remember that our church believed that when the Bible said wine, it really meant grape juice. So at communion, we had grape juice and round, paper-thin white wafers that tasted very good, like paper. Once I found a whole jar full of them in a filing cabinet in the choir room, and I ate a lot. Eating a lot was not as good as eating just one. I remember the exact moment during communion that was the hardest to keep from smiling. It was when you had to stick out your tongue and the minister laid the white wafer on it. I remember that one way to keep from smiling during communion was to think real hard about something very boring, like how airplane engines work or tree trunks. I remember movies in school about kids that drink and take drugs and then they have a car wreck and one girl gets killed. I remember one day in psychology class, the teacher asked everyone who had regular bowel movements to raise their hand. I don't remember if I had regular bowel movements or not, but I remember that I raised my hand. I remember changing my name to Bo Brainard for about 1 week. I remember not being able to pronounce mirror. I remember wanting to change my name to Jacques Bernard. I remember when I used to sign my paintings by Joe. I remember a dream of meeting a man made out of very soft yellow cheese, and when I went to shake his hand, I just pulled his whole arm off. Well, that's the way that ends, and our next reader is a wonderful writer and novelist, poet, Harry Matthews.
From Self-Portrait, 1971. Age. Well, let's just say 30 years ago today, I wasn't anything. Childhood. I find it very hard to believe I was ever a child. Queer. The only thing that ever bothered me about being queer was that I thought maybe people wouldn't like me if they knew. Health. Now that there's a health food store just down 6th Avenue, I'm trying to be more aware. One dumb thing. One dumb thing that always makes me want to cry is, someday my prince will come without words. When I was a kid, my main desire in life was to grow up and get out and make everybody like me. Now I'm out and as grown up means anything. Not much. And I'm still trying to make everybody like me. The only difference is that now I know better. Writing. Writing, for me, is a way of talking the way I wish I could talk. Practical. Actually, I am practical. It's just that sometimes being impractical seems practical to me. romantic. I'm just sure I'm going to die young, which 10 years ago was now. Selfish. I'm selfish, yes, but I think I'm selfish in a realistic way, which actually is not being selfish. Egomaniac. I guess I must be an egomaniac, but it's funny, I don't feel like an egomaniac. Why I'm a painter. One reason why I'm a painter is because I'm not a movie star. Conceit. To tell you the truth, I don't think I'm as conceited as I have a right to be. I must be growing old. I've stopped yanking out gray hairs as they appear now. I just let them accumulate, and every now and then I have a big yanking session. My biggest fear is that some morning I'm going to wake up to find that I don't like myself anymore. 4 o'clock. When it gets to be around 4 o'clock and I have no plans for the evening, I start getting nervous. Tomorrow. I always know what I'm going to do tomorrow, but thank God I'm often wrong. Why I leave my shirt open. Many years ago, Joe Lasser made the mistake of telling me I have a terrific stomach. Shy. If being shy is just a habit, it's a hard habit to find a replacement for. Terrible at leaving. I say, well, I guess I should be going. Nothing happens. Art. Art to me is like walking down the street with someone and saying, don't you love that building? Too. Optimistic. I guess I must be optimistic because secretly I think I'm going to be a fantastic person one of these days. Skinny. I complain of being skinny, and people say, oh, you're not skinny. And I look in the mirror, and I am skinny, God damn it. Where do I draw the line? I am vain. Yes, but you wouldn't catch me under a sun lamp for $1 million. Actually, I don't believe in drawing lines. Me now. Funny, I don't remember having much to do with how I got this way. I wonder, God, when I think back, am I still that transparent? My favorite quotations. Van Gogh. There is something inside of me. What is it? W.C. Fields. I never smoked a cigarette until I was 9. Jim Morrison. Loneliness is boring. Janis Joplin. Get it while you can. Betty Grable. I think kindness is the most important thing in a person, don't you? Gee, when anybody does anything nice for me, I just about fall on my face. Jimmy Schuyler. The only thing worse than Christmas itself are the people who hate Christmas. Janis Joplin, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Frank O'Hara, grace to be born and live as variously as possible. Francis Picabia, if it's inspiration you want, drop your panties. In conclusion, a short anecdote which I've been I've long wanted to make public. Ron Padgett did not include it in his wonderful memoir of Joe for the simple reason that no one had told him about it. In March 1973, Kenward Elmsley, Maxine Grofsky, Joe, and I went on a tour of Sicily together. We landed in Palermo, where we spent a couple of days before driving on to Trapani, Piazza Armerina, Syracuse, and finally Taormina. When we settled into our hotel rooms on arrival in each place, we would find one or more postcards that Joe had written to each of us at the previous stop, saying how much he was enjoying traveling with us, commenting on a particular meal or a site we had visited. The results of Joe's initiative were astonishment and happiness. It has always typified for me the essence of his human and artistic nature. It was an act that was simple to the point of obviousness. Why had no one thought of doing this before? It was absolutely original, and it was animated by Joe's boundless capacity for expressing love.
I never met Joe Brainard, but in the early 70s, when I would encounter his art, his writing in various chapbooks, posters, underground newspapers, fugitive pieces of paper that were floating around the East Village, it had the most uncanny, almost life-saving effect. And it's a thrill to have been part of this process of gathering all this writing together in one volume. I'm going to read the diary 1970-71. Friday, November 27th, 1970. Let me tell you about today. Kenward woke me up at 7:45 with a tray of breakfast, having a few problems these days. Then I got dressed and headed for home, picking up a container of coffee, 4 Dr. Peppers, and 2 packs of Tarrytons on the way. Junk mail, watered plants, took a vitamin pill, and worked on a long prose piece I'm working on called At This Very Moment. Depressing. Then, for some reason, to cheer me up, I unpacked an Art Nouveau necklace that never got unpacked from the summer. Actually, it's not a necklace. It's 1/2 of a belt buckle, but I'm going to have it made into a necklace one of these days. Then I did some cutting out of an autumn weed cutout. Then I went downstairs for a container of coffee and a French. The French I ate, the coffee I am still drinking. After I finish this, I will either read some of Tony Toll's new book, North, or do some more cutting out, depending upon how I feel. Then I'll do my exercises, shave, brush my teeth, get dressed, and go out. Where I'm going, I don't know yet, but I do know that I'm going out. Most always do at night. Each day is such a separate and complete thing to me, a mini life. I think maybe I'm a bit crazy. I do get a lot of work done that way, though. And if I'm not all that happy, I figure, so, well, who is? Tuesday, December 8th, 1970. Here I am, up in the air, drinking a Bloody Mary, on my way to Chicago. The great thing about flying is that for a while I can make myself realize that nothing really matters. This is not a depressing thought. I love it, feeling this way. I wish I could feel this way all the time. Because it's the truth, even if it isn't very practical, that nothing really matters. Now, I don't know if I really believe this or if I just want to believe this. No, I do believe this. Nothing really matters. Monday, December 28th, 1970. Listening to Procol Harum. A bit cheap, yes, but I like them anyway. If I have anything to say tonight, a bit drunk, it is probably just this: to like all you can when you can. Or don't think about things too much. I don't know who I think I am giving you this advice. Actually, when I talk to you, I am really talking to myself, mostly. but I guess I wouldn't be writing it down if I didn't think that you might want to know what is going through my head, too. No, the truth of the matter is that I want you to know. Thursday, February 4th, 1971. It's snowing so very quietly outside, so nice, and so blue for night in New York City. It reminds me of Christmas, how Christmas should be, and sometimes was. It's a little after midnight now, and I'm eating a box of raisins. Not so much because I like raisins as because they're good for you. So they say, if one can believe anymore in what they say. And I doubt it. And I'm drinking a beer and smoking a cigarette and listening to Janis Joplin's new album, Pearl. So beautiful. I love it because it moves me. And so do you. You make me feel good, but sorry, too. Not sorry for you. You're dead, and that doesn't hurt. And not sorry for myself, really, either. I'm not sure why I feel sorry. Unless it's because it's so logical that you should have died the way you did. So young. So infuriatingly logical. I mean, I don't want you in my pocket. Everybody deserves more than that. And especially tonight, you. Monday, February 8th, 1971. Bridget Polk said to me last night that I was the most honest person she knew. I wanted to say no, but somehow more than just no. I don't remember what I said, but this morning I was thinking about it, and it came to me what I should have said, that honest is only something you can try to be, if you want to be. And I do. But I don't want to have to take credit for being honest, because even if it were possible, it would be too much to have to live up to. Another impossible weight. Thursday, February 18th, 1971. Being as vain as I am, I'm surprised that I'm not horrified by all the white hairs I keep finding in my hair these days. But I'm not. I just yank them out. Which means, perhaps, that I'm not going to grow old very gracefully, and that I may go bald before I go gray. Today was a beautiful day outside, but I spent it in doing drawings of Ted Berrigan. One is a good drawing, but doesn't look much like Ted. And the other one looks a lot like Ted, but it isn't a very good drawing. Then, after Ted left, I worked on the new I Remember, ate an apple, and began writing this. And now it is beginning to get dark already. Another day gone before you know it, and that's the way I like it. Tuesday, March 23rd, 1971. I just knew this morning, when I asked the deli man for 3 packs of cigarettes instead of the usual 2, that he was going to say something, and he did. He said, "You sure smoke a lot, son." And I said, "Oh, I don't smoke all these." And he said, "Well, who does?" But by then, everything was in the bag and paid for, so I didn't have to continue my lie. He'd really be shocked if he knew that at night I buy more cigarettes at a different deli. Well, everybody deserves 1 or 2 things not to have to be careful about, I figure, and smoking is one of mine. Too many things to do today, and I really don't know why. I shouldn't even be sitting here writing, but I feel like it, and somehow I can't face this day without first sorting it all out. Larry Fagan arrives at 11 to sit for me, to draw, and to pick up the flyer Bill Katz did for my reading. I got a beautiful purple rock in the mail this morning from Bill Berkson for my birthday, late. And last night, Bridget Polk gave me a necklace she made out of feathers in the shape of a heart. But back to today. I should call the dope man about picking up the dope tomorrow instead of today. And J.J. Mitchell and Kenward Elmsley. Call Kenward Elmsley about dinner. Then new cutout to take to Kulik to be framed. I really should do that today. And then 2:30, I go to do some drawings of Louis Falco and his company. In rehearsal. That ought to be interesting, as they never stay still for more than a second. So sexy, dancers. I envy them, being so down to earth with their bodies. I do wonder sometimes why I try to do all I try to do, too much. I mean, what do I want? I guess I don't know. I guess I'm still trying to find out what I can have. Then maybe I'll know what I want, but I doubt it. And surely what one wants is continually changing, I should hope. Actually, if the truth be known, I think I just like to keep busy so I don't have to use my head too much. And when you get right down to it, want isn't very important anyway. What's important is need. And what's really important is to make yourself need as little as possible. Life can get pretty scary if you don't watch out. And next reader is Ron Padgett.
That was Geoffrey O'Brien. Poem. Sometimes everything seems so, oh, I don't know. Art. Looking through a book of drawings by Holbein, I realized several moments of truth. A nose, a line, so nose-like, so line-like. And then I think to myself, so what? It's not going to solve any of my problems. And then I realize that at the very moment of appreciation, I had no problems. Then I decide that this is a pretty profound thought and that I ought to write it down. This is what I have just done, but it doesn't sound so profound anymore. That's art for you. Joe wrote very few plays in his life. In fact, I think he wrote only one, and this is it. It's a very short play called The Gay Way, a play. The curtain rises to reveal a typical New York City village bedroom of the mid-1950s. Two young men, Bob and Dick, are in bed together, asleep. Arm in arm, their bodies are covered from the waists down with a white sheet. Morning sunlight is streaming through the window as Bob begins to stir. Bob, I guess I'd better be getting up. As Bob begins to pull back the sheet, the curtain quickly drops because, you see, male nudity was not allowed on the stage in the mid-1950s, and homosexual themes were heavily frowned upon. As the indignant audience storms out of the theater shouting, "Goddamn pansies!" and "We want our money back," the play continues behind the curtain. As Dick gets out of bed and joins Bob on the floor for some very wild lovemaking, use your imagination here, much to the amusement of the stagehands, who, you see, are the real audience. Some notes on The Gay Way. Unfortunately, only a limited number of seats will be available due to union laws pertaining to a fixed number of stagehands allowed on stage per performance. The author has nothing against a male and female production so long as a homosexual audience is used and the title be changed appropriately to The Straight Way. Should your production be rated, the author recommends that you try to accept the raid as part of the play. It's a beautiful piece of Joe's called 10 Imaginary Still Lifes that I've always loved. I thought it was a wonderful invention of his, just as the simplicity of his book, I Remember, and as Harry Matthews talked about, the simplicity of sending postcards to your friends ahead of them as you come to the next stop. This thought is, why didn't I think of doing that? And that always struck me with this piece too. 10 Imaginary Still Lifes. Imaginary Still Life number 1. I close my eyes. I see a light green vase, a very pale light green vase. Right beside it sits something black, something small. It is a small black ashtray, getting smaller by the moment, until, really, it is hardly more than, now, a tiny speck. Imaginary Still Life number 2. I close my eyes. I see white, lots of white, and gray, cool gray, cool gray fabric shadows. It is a painting with no yellow by a very old man. Imaginary still life number 3. I close my eyes. I see bright orange, almost red, a touch of purple, a speck of black, and a thick bluish stem. An exotic flower of some sort. Driftwood, bamboo, a figurine, chartreuse. 1953. This is a Polynesian still life. Imaginary still life number 4. I close my eyes. I see a white statue, say 10 inches high, of David, alabaster, and pink rose petals sprinkled upon a black velvet drape. This is a sissy still life, but pretty, silly, but pretty, and in a certain way almost religious, Eastern religious. This still life is secretly smiling. Imaginary still life number 5. I close my eyes. I see a charming nosegay of violets in an ordinary drinking glass. That's all. Imaginary still life number 6. I close my eyes. I see old fruit, pots and pans, and various and scattered utensils. Brown, art, Dutch, by nobody in particular. Museum. And so, on to the Franz Hals. Imaginary still life number 7. I close my eyes. I see a lazy guitar, a little potted cactus plant, and the rainbow blendings of very bright colors woven into a poncho, slung across a hand-painted wooden chair. 1955. This is a tourista postcard still life. Imaginary still life number 8. I close my eyes, I see pink and green and gold, all mixed up together, but now slowly evolving into 3 distinctive shapes. It is a pink kimono, gently discarded upon the corner of a green dressing table, which enters the picture frame at a very sharp angle. Behind it stands a gold screen of 3 panels. In this particular Japanese still life, one gets the impression that something is going on that cannot be seen. Imaginary still life number 9. I close my eyes. I see upon the corner of a black lacquered end table, I see a clear crystal ashtray containing a long white cigarette butt crushed up into the figure Z. Pink smears along the filter's edge implicate a woman. And now I can smell blue smoke in the air, lingering from a most recent exit, perhaps in a huff. A dozen dark red roses in a very tall vase complete this elegant, if icy, still life. A still life with a story, and probably a sad one. Imaginary still life number 10. I close my eyes. I see something copper, a teapot with missing lid, and dried cornflowers in an earthenware pot against a brown velvet drape. Sniff. I can smell last week's clay still in the air. As Mrs. Black, my high school art teacher, leans over my shoulder, trying not to be too impressed with the dashing highlights I have no doubt overindulged in to impress her with. You should try doing that sometime. Make your own imaginary still lives. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to read 2 more pieces, and I'm going to read one that's just for the hell of it. And it's called Little Known Facts About People. Did you know that Kenneth Koch's wife, Janice, used to be an airplane pilot? Once she had to make an emergency landing on a highway. When Kenward Elmsley was a kid, he wanted to be a tap dancer. Did you know that Kenward's grandfather was Joseph Pulitzer? Kenward once told me that Jane Russell is a dyke. Andy Warhol wanted to be a tap dancer when he was a kid, too. Dee Dee Ryan wanted to be a ballerina. Did you know that Pat Padgett was Ted Berrigan's girlfriend for years before she married Ron? Ron Padgett and I were in the same first grade class together in school in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Ron's father, Wayne, was a notorious bootlegger in Tulsa until Oklahoma went wet. A few years ago, Ron's father got divorced and married a beautiful Las Vegas showgirl, younger than Ron's wife, Pat. Did you know that Bill Berkson was once bat boy for the Yankees? Ted Berrigan married his wife, Sandy, after having known her for 5 days. Did you know that the first poems John Ashbery ever had published were published in Poetry magazine under the name of Joel Symington? Did you know that Bill Berkson was on the 100 Best Dressed Men list of 1967? Rudy Burkhart once dated Miss Vermont of 1938. Donald Droll is in some way related to Daniel Boone. Frank O'Hara once told me that he really wanted to be a concert pianist. Did you know that Harry Matthews started out to be a composer? He studied at the Juilliard School of Music. Edwin Denby was born in China. Anne Waldman's father wrote a book called Rapid Reading Made Simple. Tom Veitch's father writes Christmas card verse. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a fashion designer, a minister, and an artist. Peter Sheldall's father is very famous in the plastic area. He discovered the new lightweight plastic used in Bufferin bottles. Soon, he hopes to open a contraceptive factory in Red China. Did you know that Bill Berkson was once on the show I Remember Mama? Dee Dee Ryan went to see the Boys in the Band with Jackie Kennedy just a week before she married Onassis. John Ashbery was a quiz kid. Kenneth Koch once won the Glasscock Award. Did you know that Ron Padgett has blebs on his lung, which may explode at any moment? They have exploded twice already. Tina Louise once sang, "I'm in the mood for love," to Bill Berkson over London broils at P.J. Clark's. Did you know that Ted Berrigan did his thesis at Tulsa University on George Bernard Shaw? Did you know that the Katz tumor is named after Ada Katz, who discovered it? Edwin Denby once performed in Berlin's Wintergarten, billed as Der amerikanische groteske Tanzer Dumbi. Yvonne Burkhart was the backstroke swimming champion of Connecticut for 1 week. When I lived in Boston, I used to panhandle on the street where all the art galleries were, and I got my cigarette butts from the urns in front of the Museum of Fine Arts. Did you know that Ted Berrigan's first book of poems, A Lily for My Love, was published by the Lenox Bar in Providence, Rhode Island? Greta Garbo once called Bill Berkson her ice cream man. I once went to a come-as-your-favorite-person party as Marilyn Monroe. Did you know that John Ashbery once worked in a cherry canning factory? I actually asked John Ashbery about that once. I said, "Did you really work in a cherry canning factory?" He said, "Yes, it was awful." And the last piece is a piece that Joe never published. And on the manuscript that I discovered of it, he had written "slow!" exclamation point, 3 exclamation points. And it is slow, but that's part of the beauty of it. It's a short paragraph called January 13th. Mozart is coming out of the machine, real soft, just for company, like that of a cat in a room. A bright red Campari and soda sits off to my right, just within arm's reach. A moment away from the ashtray, a deep blue enameled disc inlaid with a sliver of white moon and sprinkled with silver specks of something to represent stars, all somewhat obscured by 3 cigarette butts snuggled up close together, spoon style, that each says "True" in tiny blue letters if you look real close. My left leg over the arm of the chair swings back and forth and back and forth. Ooh, shoes overhead cross room. Outside my window, snow is falling down against a translucent sky of deep lavender with a touch of orange, zigzagged along the bottom into a silhouette of black buildings. The icebox clicks off and shudders. And it's as simple as this, what I want to tell you about, if perhaps not much, everything, painting the moment for you tonight. And the next reader and the final reader is Edmund White.
I'm just going to read a couple pages of I Remember. I remember when the word fairy began to evoke snickering, not knowing why. Then later I do remember knowing why. What I don't remember is how I learned what it meant. Just a gradual process of putting two and two together, I guess, plus a bit of speculation. I remember white rubber sink plugs on chains. I remember not to stand up in the bathtub because I might slip and fall and bash my head open. I remember, this is the last time I'm going to tell you. I remember in the but why department, because I say so, that's why. I remember birthday parties. I remember pink and brown and white ice cream in layers. I remember little silk American flags and little bamboo and paper Japanese umbrellas that if you tried to open them all the way up, broke. I remember at least once only pretending to make a wish before blowing the candles out. I remember how hard it was to get a round of happy birthday going. I remember never going to a birthday party where we played pin the tail on the donkey. I remember canned creamed corn. I remember cream of wheat lumps. I remember roast beef and carrots and potatoes and gravy, and underneath it all a piece of soggy white bread, the best part. I remember when your beet juice runs into your mashed potatoes, red mashed potatoes. I remember looking forward to a certain thing or event that is going to happen and trying to visualize it's actually happening and not understanding time one bit. Frustrating. Frustrating because at times one can almost grab it, but then you realize it's too slippery and just too complicated, and so you lose your footing, totally back to nowhere. Frustrating. Still believing that a certain sort of understanding is somehow possible if approached delicately enough from just the right angle. I remember floating transparent spots before my eyes every now and then for a moment, microscopic, like when you stand up real fast. I remember many claustrophobic dreams of being in tight and endless places that get even more tight and more endless and not being able to get out. I remember thinking about breathing, and then your head takes over the effort of breathing, and you see that it's hard work, and it's all very spooky somehow. I remember teenagers riding around in convertibles with their radios on loud. I remember after school soda fountain shops with booths and a jukebox, but only in the movies. I remember jukeboxes you could see pick up the records. I remember blowing straws. I remember parking. I remember necking. I remember petting. I remember stripped cars, no chrome. I remember Buicks with holes in them, 3 or 4 along each side, I think it was. I remember big sponge dice dangling up front. I remember noisy exhaust pipes. I remember souvenir state decals on car rear windows. I remember that some cars had a lot. I remember St. Christopher medals on chains around necks that had nothing to do with being Catholic. I remember old ladies' houses with a lot of things to break in them. I remember crocheted doilies on the backs and arms of big stuffed chairs. I remember maroon and navy blue felt house shoes with fuzzy balls on top. I remember plastic placemats, the texture of woven straw. I remember boat steering wheel wall lamps. I remember man tan and orange stains on white shirts. I remember trying to get a tan out in the backyard and thinking I'd been out for an hour or so, going inside to discover that I'd only been out for 15 or 20 minutes. I remember after being outside in the sun for a while, going inside, and the few moments or so of seeing almost negative. I remember a tall girl with blonde hair who every year got a really dark tan. She wore white a lot to set it off, and light pink wet lipstick. Her mother was very tall too. Her father was crippled from polio. They had money. I remember the smell of Jergens hand lotion on hands and its pearly white texture as it oozes from the bottle. I remember large bars of ivory soap that broke easily into two. Actually, now that I think about it, not so easily. I remember the Dutch cleanser girl with no face. I remember wondering about the comfort and practicality of wooden shoes. I remember filling out a form once and not knowing what to put down for race. I remember speculating that probably someday all races would get mixed up into one race. I remember speculating that probably someday science would come up with some sort of miracle cream that could bleach skin and Negroes could become white. I remember too recently writing something I especially liked in a letter and using it again in another letter and feeling a bit cheap about it. I remember, to be more accurate, feeling cheap about it because I didn't feel cheap about it. I remember a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I remember no way to scratch your ear in the dentist chair when your ear itches. I remember red roses for a blue lady. A blue lady? I remember the clips that were hard to keep straight. Tie clips that were hard to keep straight. I remember in signing off a letter, yours till the kitchen sinks. I remember face jokes. I remember finger hooked in mouth. Lady, would you please hang your umbrella somewhere else? I remember pulling skin around eyes into Oriental. Mommy, you made my braids too tight. I remember squashing face between hands. Bus driver, will you please open the door? I remember little records with big holes, 45s, and being able to carry a whole stack of them between a thumb and a finger. I remember little yellow and red and green plastic children's records. I remember chipped beef and gravy on toast. I remember in Boston figuring out that a street with lots of antique shops on it might be good for cruising, and so I did a lot of walking up and down it, window shopping. But as I was afraid to look at anybody, I didn't do too well. The understatement of the year. So home I'd go to my handiwork, often aided by menswear ads in back issues of Playboy magazine, which was no easy feat considering how carefully men's fashion photos avoid any hint of a body underneath. Underwear ads the most infuriating of all. However, they did slip up every now and then. Like once I remember a very sexy 2-page bathing suit spread that got a lot of views. And in reference to no easy feat, that was long before it ever occurred to me that a little soap and water or Vaseline or something might help. Thanks. I just wanted to talk about, I remember my first date with Joe Brainard. I don't remember who introduced us, but anyway, I went to his loft on Green Street and climbed all those endless stairs. And you first entered a big room that was where he kept all millions of tiny bits and pieces of things that he thought were going to go into collages. Although by the time I knew him, he wasn't making art. He had stopped taking speed, and so he couldn't make art anymore. And then he had a bed, just a single bed on the floor, a mattress on the floor, and a radio, and he listened endlessly to country western music. That was all he ever listened to. And he read big, fat Victorian novels, one after another. Like, he'd pick up Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens, and when he'd finish, whoops, and then when he, oh dear. Sorry. And then when he'd finish that, he would pick up another Dickens novel and read it entirely, and he never remembered them. But so he was always safe in reading it again. Then he was so shy that it was hard for him to talk on our first date. And so he brought along a pad and pencil. And we sat in a restaurant, and we wrote notes to each other back and forth. Like, you're really nice, thank you, you are too. And whatever, and just dumb things. And he always paid for the dinner, and he'd go to this big drawer where he kept money. And he had thousands of dollars in there that I think Kindred had given him a lot of stocks and bonds, so he just clipped all of those coupons and had lots and lots of money. And he would take $500 out and say, "Do you think this will be enough for dinner?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And then one time I remember we got so stoned that we undertipped the waiter, and the waiter rushed out and banged on the taxi window and said, "Was there something wrong with the service?" And we felt so humiliated. And of course, Joe gave him extra hundreds of dollars. And Joe always wore these beautiful Armani suits and his white shirt open to his navel, even in the dead of winter, and never wore overcoats, just that outfit. And he was always so sweet. And he gave me lots of his books, which I think I gave to the Beinecke Library. But I think that, little short books that he did with drawings and things. And he was always extremely sweet and mainly appreciative of everybody and everything. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
That's just a small sampling of the Cabinet of Wonders. That's the collected writings of Joe Brainard, and some reasons why you should find your way to the table just outside the auditorium and own your own copy. And please join me now in thanking all of the great readers tonight.